I'm delighted to be here today and be a part of the introduction of our new series. Let me start with a quote. You're always safe in doing that since you blame it on somebody else. Eric Hoffer, the great longshoreman philosopher, one of my favorites, said, "In time of drastic change, it is the learners who inherit the future. The learned usually find themselves equipped to live in a world that no longer exists." I'm afraid that many of our leaders in government and academia are the supposed learned who live in their world that no longer exists. As you know, the Enlightenment over a couple of hundred years changed how we looked at our religious orientation to one based on reason and scientific discovery and critical thinking. Philosophers worked hard to replace the religious with rational thought. Marx, Voltaire, and many others predicted that religion was on the way out. Yet empires have crumbled, political systems are out of vogue, economic systems replaced, but the great religions have not only survived, but are on the increase. David Brooks said in 2003, quote, "The misconception that may be the most damaging is seen in the social science, quantitative, cost-benefit mindset of our intelligence and foreign policy agencies. The CIA's published assessment of world trends to 2015 says nothing about religion. Globalization is the focus. Religious motives escape the CIA's rationalistic categories, and so they leave it out. And also, David said, future historians looking back at us will wonder how so many highly schooled people could be so ignorant of religion." I must confess that I was one of those who was very ignorant. I began the process of learning. I am trying to understand the situation today and the reasons for it. I have been searching for a number of years to overcome my realized ignorance on this subject and to make sense of what I have seen, experienced, and read. And I reserve the right to learn more. One of the things I believe that truth is always politically correct. I want to tell you about a few vignettes which have disturbed me in some ways. Others just pointed out that the more I learn sometimes, the less I seem to know. A former director of DIA, one of my colleagues, a guy I greatly respect, was giving a briefing on all the threats around the world, from tsunamis to medical, et cetera. And when he finished the briefing, I asked the first question, and I said, "You know, your entire briefing and all your slides, the word Islam was never mentioned." And he said, "I refuse to talk about religion." Former director of DIA. I had an encounter with then Senator Joe Biden, as everybody does on the train, but just three of us sitting, and I'd briefed Joe Biden before. And as we were talking, he pointed out a little experience he had with President Bush. He said they were talking, the subject was Middle East and so forth, and the president said, "Joe, can you stick around for a minute?" And of course, he was certainly able to do that. And he looked at him and said, "You know, the thing that we have to keep in mind as we look at these situations is that all the world hungers for democracy." And when you start with that kind of an assumption, it's hard to get very far. I travel a lot. When I was in Italy, sitting in a little town outside Rome, beautiful castle. I speak Italian, and so talking to the locals, and two Muslim ladies walked by, and I said, you have a number of Muslims?" And their concern was, he said, yes, they did, and what they were trying to do now was to take down all the crucifixes in Italy. And I'm not Catholic, but I can tell you, having lived in Italy for 3 years, crucifix is sort of part of that culture. Had to pay a fine, a parking fine, and walk into the police station. There's a crucifix there. And they were concerned that they might be able to do that. They're simply following their tactics. Immigrate, consolidate, build a mosque, and begin with something like the dress code, or in this case, take down the crucifix. And as I traveled, I was recently in Ireland, and I was introduced to an Irish brigadier who had had 5 or 6 tours in the Middle East. And as we chatted, he said one of the things that I had to keep in mind, it took me a while to learn it, there are two things to keep in mind, and you can deal with the Muslims, to realize that there are only two kinds of people in the Middle East. There are infidels and there are Muslims. Got to learn that, one. And two, everything that they do is about religion. So that was his experience, based on experience. Secretary Rumsfeld, when pushed a little bit recently on a talk show, what was the biggest mistake you made? You know, that's a tough question for a guy that's been in office as long as Secretary Rumsfeld. And so finally he said, the mistake we made is we never defined the enemy because of Bush's fear of offending the Muslims. Then, of course, he made his political statement and said it's much worse today under Obama. So that brings me to another quote. A guy named Sun Tzu. You know, generals have to always quote Sun Tzu. If ignorant both of your enemy and yourself, you're certain to be in peril. Know your enemy and know yourself, and you can fight 100 battles without disaster. Today, we seem to be blinded to the realities of different cultures and impacts on the formulation of foreign policy and our intelligence analysis. Our quantitative processing of huge amounts of data allow us to know what, where, when, who, and how, but rarely do we ever answer the question, why? And as most of you know, in the report, the murders at Fort Hood, the word Islam never appeared in the Army report, as opposed to after 9/11, over 300 in the quotes, or the word Islam in that report. In the interim, the advisors to the president said no more of that, and so we don't address that. Well, with all that, I think it's different now, and I believe that the work that Frank and his crew have just completed will provide an educational tool that will do much to eliminate the ignorance that pervades the country about a significant threat to our national security, which is not going to go away. I'm going to go away and turn it over to Frank. Thanks.